Black Rook Hold returns as one of the new dungeons for Mythic Plus in Season 3. The dungeon will start with a 39-minute timer, so as long as you complete the dungeon within that window, you will upgrade your key. As you start the key, you'll have the option of either going right or left. No matter which path you choose, the trash is identical here, so here's what you'll be dealing with. Ghostly Counselors will cast Soul Blast on random players, dealing moderate shadow damage. Feel free to kick this, but you will definitely want to save kicks for their Dark Mending ability, which should be instantly interrupted. This channel will heal their nearby allies for 15% health every 1 second. Ghostly Retainers will cast Soul Blade on a random target, dealing decent upfront damage to that player and leaving a 30-second magic dot on them. This will need dispelling as this dot definitely hurts and can also stack. Ghostly Protectors will cast Sacrifice Soul after about 20 seconds. This will buff their allies to take 75% reduced damage for 15 seconds. However, during the buff, the Protector themselves will take 200% increased damage, so make sure to nuke this guy down. Note that if you line of sight all of the mobs, they will follow you out of the damage reduction aura, and you can continue to DPS as normal. Depending on which route you took, you'll fight one of two mini-bosses here. If you chose to go right, you'll fight Lady Illysana Ravencrest. She will attack the tank with a frontal strike down attack, dealing heavy damage and leaving a 20% increased physical damage taken debuff to anybody hit. She will also cast Glaive Toss at random players, dealing damage to them and bouncing to other players if nearby, so make sure to have your range spread here. If you went left at the start, you'll encounter Lord Atheldrin Ravencrest. He'll cast Spirit Blast at random targets, which can be interrupted. This deals moderate shadow damage to the player. He will also frequently debuff random players with Soul Echoes. After receiving this debuff, the player will begin to drop ghostly versions of themselves where they stand. In total, this will drop 11 echoes, so just make sure to spread them in a safe place because after 4 seconds, each echo will detonate, dealing damage to nearby players. After taking out the first trash, you'll encounter the first boss in Black Rook Hold, the Amalgam of Souls. The boss will target a random player with Swirling Scythe. The selected player will have a few seconds to move out the way before the scythe reaches them and pretty much one-shots them. If not, it will also knock you back. This scythe persists for 30 seconds, so just avoid coming into contact with it during the fight. Soul Echoes will target a random player, forcing them to leave behind ghostly echoes of themselves, much like the mini-boss we just encountered. Stutter step away while dropping these echoes away from your party members to avoid taking damage and getting feared when they detonate after 4 seconds. Frequently during the fight, the boss will cast Reap Soul, dealing fatal damage to players in a 180-degree arc in front of him. Players should make sure to position themselves behind the boss at all times, while tanks can also position the boss near the edge of the room, so most of the arc is actually outside the encounter just for extra safety. Tanks need to make sure they're safe as well from this cast, as it will likely kill them too. The main mechanic of this fight will occur once the Amalgam reaches 50% health. He will begin to cast Cool Souls. This draws out 7 restless souls from outside of the arena that slowly travel in towards the boss. Your whole group will need to hard swap to these adds and kill them off before they reach the boss. Use CC here to help you slow them down. Each soul that reaches the boss will be absorbed through Soul Gorge, giving him a 30% damage bonus to his Soul Burst ability he casts 30 seconds into this phase. This ability deals heavy party-wide damage and will likely one-shot your group if a few souls have been absorbed. Regardless if this cast is empowered or not, your group should use personal defensives here to avoid being one-shot. After the cast finishes, the fight resumes with the previous mechanics. After taking out the first boss, you wait out a bit of RP before the door opens and you can continue up the stairs home to clusters of Rook Spiderlings and their Rook Spinner Matriarch. The Spiderlings are buffed with Soul Venom, causing their melee attacks to occasionally inflict their target with a 16-second magic dot that needs to be dispelled once stacks are high. Tanks need to make sure they have aggro on all of the Spiderlings here, or the DPS could die very easily from moderate stacks of the debuff. The Rook Spiderlings will cast Internal Rupture upon death, applying Soul Venom to players nearby. Players should avoid standing near the Spiderlings when they're close to death to avoid getting high stacks. The Rook Spinner near the top has much more health but only deals melee damage, so focus your priority damage into this mob. At the top of the staircase, you'll encounter some new undead mobs. These packs can be extremely dangerous, so be on high alert here. Risen Arcanist will cast Arcane Blitz at random players, also granting them a 50% damage buff for every successful cast. Interrupt as many of these as you can, but also note that the buff is purgeable. These mobs are generally your highest priority in the area. These Arcanists are often accompanied by arcane minions that teleport to their target with phased explosion, dealing heavy damage to nearby players after 4 seconds, so avoid standing in the swirly. Risen Archers will shoot random targets for heavy physical damage and occasionally leap to a random location with an arrow barrage. This deals massive damage to players stood in the big frontal cone of arrows, so players need to immediately sidestep the incoming arrows. Soul Torn Champions target the tank with a frontal cone in Bone Breaking Strike, stunning and probably one-shotting players that stand in the targeted zone. Tanks should face these mobs away from the party to make dodging easier. Risen Companions will jump to a random target with Bloodthirsty Leap, dealing heavy damage to players within 10 yards and applying a stacking dot. Do not stack when fighting these tigers, as damage will quickly become unhealable if multiple players are struck. Risen Scouts will channel Knife Dance occasionally, dealing big AoE damage to the party for 5 seconds. Players should be ready to hard CC this cast with stuns or disorients to avoid wiping here. After clearing the room, your party will be ambushed by Commander Shemdison, accompanied by archers and scouts. To group up these mobs easier, players should hide behind the pillar to the right of the room so that they stack up. This mini-boss is essentially a higher health Soul Torn champion. Again, tanks should face away the commander from the group for his bone-breaking strike. Once you've defeated all of this trash, you'll head upstairs to fight Illysana Ravencrest. Periodically, she will cast Brutal Glaive, dealing moderate damage and leaving a long dot effect on players struck. The glaive will bounce to other nearby players, so make sure to stay as spread as you can here to avoid your whole party being struck. If you are affected, commit a personal defensive to help out your healer. During the fight, the boss will target 3 players with Dark Rush. After 6 seconds, she will rush to each marked player, leaving a blazing trail. Players stood in the trail will suffer moderate periodic damage. The 3 marked players should stack relatively close and along the sides of the arena to limit the amount of space covered by the trail. Illysana will deal huge tank damage through Vengeful Shear. The tanks need to use active mitigation here, or she'll leave behind a Vengeful Shear debuff that can stack, increasing incoming damage. Upon reaching full energy, Ravencrest will rise up and target players with eye beams. Any player can be targeted here and will receive a Fixate debuff. Illysana will then chase that player with eye beams for 12 seconds, leaving behind patches of Failblaze ground. The targeted player should react quickly and try to place these patches along the edges of the room where the rest of the party will not be as affected. During this phase, the boss will summon 2 adds to help fight for her. Tanks need to pick up aggro on both of these mobs. The Vanguard's only ability is Bone Crushing Strike, which deals heavy damage to any player stood in the frontal cone, and also stunning them. The Arcanist will repeatedly cast Arcane Blitz at random targets, dealing moderate damage and gaining a stacking damage buff, so make sure to interrupt these casts as often as you can. Prioritize killing the Arcanist in this phase. Once Illysana has been defeated, you'll ascend the spiral staircase. Be careful here as Worm-tongued demons at the top of the stairs roll boulders down the staircase that will deal heavy damage to players struck and also stun them, probably leading to their death from more boulders. As soon as any player reaches the top, the demons get spooked and run away, making the staircase free of boulders for the rest of your team. At the top here, you'll encounter many more demons. Worm-tongued scavengers will drink an ancient potion, gaining 1 of 3 effects at random. Indigestion will cause the scavenger to intermittently breath a cone of fire, dealing moderate damage to players stood in it. Hyperactive causes the mob to follow random players while spinning. If it does strike a player, they will become bowled over, dealing damage and knocking the player back. After spinning, the mob then becomes dizzy and is stunned for 3 seconds, and then it will continue to spin again. The final proc from the ancient potion is a frenzy potion, causing the scavenger to attack at 5 times the speed and deal 5% more damage every second until it is killed. This proc is definitely the scariest, and any mobs affected should be prioritized for killing first. These scavengers also occasionally throw priceless artifacts near players, dealing moderate damage to all players within the targeted area. Wrathguard Blade Lords deal heavy tank damage, so be careful not to pull too much with these present. Their Brutal Assault deals extreme tank damage over 2 seconds. Your group should try and coordinate stuns here to stop the Blade Lord from channeling this cast. Ideally, waiting until just after the channel begins so the mob doesn't just immediately recast the ability. Once the Blade Lord falls below 25% health, they enrage, increasing their damage done for 2 minutes and making their already scary Brutal Assault now extremely dangerous. If you've pulled 2 of these mobs at the same time, you should try to desync these Brutal Assault casts and also focus one down so the tank doesn't have to deal with both of them being enraged. And after that, the final staircase on your way to the next boss is a gauntlet consisting of Felspite Dominators and an abundance of Felbat Pups. The Dominators will gain the Fel Frenzy buff if their cast is successful, so make sure to kick this as a priority. This buff increases all nearby enemies' damage by 50% for 20 seconds, and it stacks. Very deadly for your tank, but also players fixated by the Felbat Pups thanks to the Dominator's Sick Bats cast. They target a random player with this cast and cause all Felbats to attack the chosen player. As players ascend the staircase, waves of Felbat Pups will continue to spawn every 6 to 10 seconds until you've defeated the final 2 Dominators just before Smashspite's balcony. Don't take too long to get there or you will be overwhelmed. Now we encounter Smashspite the Hateful. The boss has a brutal haymaker that he will cast upon reaching 100 energy. This ability deals extremely heavy damage to the tank and consumes all of his energy, and this hit will leave a 75% damage taken increased debuff on the tank. During this fight, tanks need to try and maintain high uptime on their mitigation, as the more damage the boss does to the tank, the more energy he gains, in turn casting another haymaker quicker. At about 30 seconds into the fight, Smashspite will call on nearby Felbats to aid him. These bats will target a random player with Fel Vomit. This will mark a green beam across the encounter, and 6 seconds after, the bat will vomit, leaving a permanent line of fel vomitus on the ground. Players stood in these pools will suffer periodic damage. If you're targeted with the vomit, try to place a line far away from your party. Around every 22 seconds, the boss will cast Earth-Shaking Stomp, dealing big damage to the entire party and knocking them back. But be careful not to get knocked back into the pools of vomit here, as the combo can be fatal. Finally, early in the fight and every 25 seconds after, the boss will target the furthest player with Hateful Gaze. 6 seconds later, he will charge at the player with Hateful Charge, dealing massive damage to the first player he encounters. Use the defensive for the impact. This player will then receive a debuff that doubles all further charge damage to that player for 1 minute, meaning the same player cannot soak the charge twice in a row, even if targeted twice. Players like the tank can intercept the charge to reduce the outgoing damage. The remaining trash consists of Risen Lancers that will choose a ranged target for Raven's Dive. Move quickly out of this swirly, otherwise you will take heavy damage and be stunned for 5 seconds, and chances are you'll take a second Raven's Dive if you're stunned and then die. Risen Swordsman will attack the tank with Coup de Grace, dealing huge damage, so tanks should prepare some mitigation here. These casts are not interruptible, however you can use stuns to stop them from casting. Finally, we encounter Lord Kur'talos Ravencrest, and later Dantalionax. Kur'talos will periodically cast Unerring Shear on the tank, dealing massive damage and leaving a permanent bleed. The tanks and healers need to be prepared to deal with this attack. He will also occasionally throw a Whirling Blade at a random player. This blade will bounce back and forth between the player and boss's location when the blade was thrown. It will deal substantial damage and knock you back if you come into contact with it, and beware, they are quite hard to see sometimes. Tanks should make sure to move the boss every time he casts it. During this first phase, Latosius will also cast a constant stream of Shadow Bolts at random players, and every 20 seconds will cast a Dark Blast, creating a straight wide line from his current position across the room. Anyone caught in the crossfire will take heavy damage and be knocked back. Upon Kur'talos reaching 20% health, Latosius will transform into Dantalionax, and about 20 seconds into this phase you will be granted the Legacy of the Ravencrest buff to help you take him down. Note that here the boss will be able to fire off a Shadow Bolt volley before you gain the buff, so you should definitely use the defensive as your health will not be scaled up yet, and the Shadow Bolt volley could prove fatal. Dantalionax will also create a cloud of hypnosis here, spawning a slow-moving patch of gas near a random player that will send players to sleep until dispelled or the player takes damage. Here he will also afflict a random target with Stinging Swarm roughly every 20 seconds. This spawns an add on top of the player that needs to be hard swapped to, as it deals heavy single target damage to the affected player and repeatedly stuns them. This stun alone can be fatal if the swarm is active while the boss casts Dreadlord's Guile. This ability splits the boss into 12 images of Latosius, and in turn casting Dark Obliteration. Like Dark Blast, this fires a wide beam across the room that players must dodge repeatedly, as each of the images cast their own beam. While running around here you must be sure to dodge the Cloud of Hypnosis, otherwise it's GG. But that's it for this boss, and that wraps up Black Rook Hold and Mythic Plus. If this guide did help you or a friend out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and subscribe to your boy. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.